Her daughter-in-law handed her a gift, with a smirk, and said, "This one's from the government." Eleanor Grant, retired nurse and widowed homeowner, didn't flinch. Amanda, the same woman who lived rent-free in Eleanor's second property, laughed as if it were clever. By morning, a fresh envelope sat on Amanda's doorstep, the full mortgage transfer, in her name only. She'd once given them shelter, trust, and silence. Now she was giving them the bills they thought she'd die before sending. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The air inside the house felt like frosting. Too sweet, too thick, and desperately artificial. Balloons, rose gold and inflated past their limit, clung to the ceiling like they'd been held hostage. Maggie Waller sat quietly at the far end of the dining table, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her own birthday party, and somehow she was the least visible person in the room. Across the table, Amanda clinked her mimosa glass to command attention. "We have a very special birthday gift for the Queen herself," she chirped with the kind of sparkle only reserved for live streams and lies. She reached into her designer tote and produced a thin white envelope. With a wink to her phone's camera, Amanda theatrically slapped it down in front of Maggie. Across the front, scrawled in thick black Sharpie, were the words, "From the government." A few guests chuckled, those who weren't sure if they were supposed to. Maggie didn't flinch. She merely blinked once, reached for the envelope, and opened it slowly. Inside was a $50 prepaid Visa card, cheap plastic, cold to the touch. She turned it over and immediately spotted the small sticker on the back. "Donated by Civic Community Partners, Public Outreach Division." A charity card, from Amanda's office, meant for low-income outreach recipients. Maggie folded the card in half and slid it back into the envelope without a word. Trevor, standing near the buffet with a slider in one hand and a craft IPA in the other, barked out a laugh. "Hey, look at that! You get perks now! Senior benefits, baby!" Maggie looked at him and gave a tight-lipped smile. The kind of smile you wear when you're calculating interest in your head. Compound, accruing. Haley slipped in from the hallway like a whisper, holding something behind her back. 16 and sweet in a way that Amanda could never fake, she came up beside Maggie and placed a folded piece of handmade paper on her lap. "I made you something," she said, quietly enough so no one else heard. Maggie opened it. Inside, a pressed lilac petal, drawn vines around the edges, and a poem handwritten in uneven lines. "You teach me quiet power. You teach me how to see. You are not a tenant. You're the roots of this tree." Maggie's hand trembled slightly. She pressed the card against her chest for a moment before slipping it into her handbag, carefully, as if it were breakable. Across the room, Amanda spun toward her phone again. "Okay, everyone, cake time. We're gonna cut and slice for the gram," she announced, already filming as she dramatically lit the candles. 73 and still fierce. Maggie sat silently while the cake was brought out, the song sung half-heartedly by people who weren't sure if they were here for celebration or optics. Amanda live-streamed the entire thing with herself in frame. Maggie appeared only as a shoulder blur in the corner. As the slices were passed out, Maggie ate hers slowly. Not because it was good, it wasn't, but because the act of chewing gave her something to focus on besides the heat rising in her chest. Pearl, seated next to her in one of Amanda's trendy, uncomfortable ghost chairs, leaned in. She picked up the discarded envelope and turned it over. When she saw the writing, her lips curled. "Oh, hell no," Pearl muttered, loud enough for Maggie to hear, but low enough to dodge the audio pickup on Amanda's phone. Maggie didn't respond. She dabbed the corners of her mouth with her napkin and looked out the bay window. The house looked different now. Not newer, not older. Just misused, like a dress taken from someone's closet without asking and worn to the wrong kind of party. Her fingers brushed the edge of the Visa card still tucked inside the envelope. Cold plastic, from the government. And Amanda was still smiling for her followers, oblivious. Maggie smiled too, but for a different reason. Because starting tomorrow, the house wouldn't feel like borrowed air anymore. It would feel like loaded ground. The next morning, the birthday balloons had lost their stretch, sagging against the kitchen ceiling like lazy regrets. Maggie stood barefoot on the cool tile, cradling a chipped mug of black coffee. The laughter from last night was gone. The only sound was the faint hum of the new stainless steel dishwasher Amanda had installed, without asking. Maggie's eyes lingered on the oversized touchscreen fridge now dominating the corner. A digital calendar flashed with color-coded events: Amanda's wine night, Trevor's work trip, Haley sat tutor. No mention of her. She set the mug down. Then quietly, deliberately, she opened the kitchen drawer that everyone pretended didn't exist, the one with the mismatched pens, expired coupons, and one folded paper that mattered more than all of it. She unfolded the refinance agreement. Her name stood alone at the top of the mortgage: Margaret Ellen Waller. No co-signer, no shared ownership, no transfer, just her. She traced the embossed seal with her thumb like it was the spine of a trusted book. From the living room came the sound of Amanda's laughter. Maggie didn't need to look to know what she'd find. Amanda curled into her armchair, legs tucked under her like she belonged there, scrolling Zillow listings for quartz counters and open shelving, inspiration for the kitchen reno. New rugs, new sconces, new paint on the hallway she never asked to have changed. Maggie had stopped commenting months ago, but she hadn't stopped noticing. And now, she hadn't stopped documenting. She walked the house with her phone that afternoon, slow and silent. Click. The dining room chandelier Amanda called aesthetic. Click. The powder room wallpaper from some influencer's discount code. Click. Amanda's framed wedding portrait in the entryway niche, where Maggie used to keep a photo of her late husband in uniform. Each click was a ledger entry in her quiet account. Later that week, she sat in Clarence Booth's office, a simple brick building tucked behind an insurance agency and an old coin shop. Clarence, ever dry, wore a navy sweater that looked exactly like the one he wore to her husband's funeral. He looked over the refinance file, nodding. "They're not even on the mortgage. The title's clean," he said. "I know." "If you want out," he added, adjusting his glasses, "we can file to force repayment. You'd be within your rights to collect for the years of cohabitation, backdated utility burden, and asset misuse." Maggie looked out his window. The winter light caught the edge of a tree limb still holding onto frost. She imagined Amanda's voice, bright and sharp like a wine cork snapping in half, complaining about the thermostat or the garbage day mix-up or how Maggie's casseroles were too Midwest. She turned back to Clarence, calm as still water. "Not yet," she said. "I want her to hang a few more drapes first." Clarence smiled, just barely. Understood. The deed was moved into a revocable living trust that afternoon. Clean, legal, bulletproof. Maggie signed it with a pen she brought from home, a matte green rollerball her husband had once given her after her final year working at the school. As she handed it back, Clarence tapped the corner of the document and said, "Quiet moves are the most dangerous ones." That night, she sat on the porch alone with a throw blanket across her knees and a second cup of coffee cooling in her hand. Amanda's laugh drifted through the house again, this time from the master bedroom. Maggie listened for a moment, not to the sound itself, but to the emptiness underneath it. Then she reached for her phone and opened the photo gallery. One by one, she tapped each image and dropped them into a folder labeled, "House Mine." She smiled without teeth, and just as she stood to go inside, her phone buzzed, an email from the HOA. The subject line chilled her blood and tightened her jaw all at once. "Dear Amanda Waller, regarding your upcoming renovation approval." The front door slammed with a kind of entitlement that no one under the roof had earned. Maggie glanced up from her jigsaw puzzle, a 1,000-piece panoramic of Acadia in the fall, just barely started, and listened. Footsteps, Amanda's heels, staccato and smug. Voices followed, female, chirpy, nasal, the unmistakable clatter of charcuterie trays hitting her good serving platters, and laughter, hollow and rehearsed. "Ladies, Wine's in the dining room. If you need to powder your noses, we redid the guest bath, finally got rid of that old wallpaper. Amanda's voice floated down the hall like perfume you didn't ask for. Maggie rose without a word, padded toward the stairs and paused just at the landing. From there, she could see the crowd, 7 women dressed in Lululemon and loud jewelry, draped across her dining chairs like this was a country club tasting event. Amanda stood at the center, gesturing as if she were on a home tour show. "And that's our tenant," Amanda said with a tilt of her wine glass toward the staircase. "She's mostly harmless, keeps to herself." Maggie's breath caught, not from surprise, but from the way something long dormant clenched in her ribs. The women laughed in that tight, complicit way that polite women do when cruelty is camouflaged as wit. Pearl appeared beside her at the top of the stairs, having let herself in the back like she always did. She glanced down, narrowed her eyes, then leaned in with a whisper laced in battery acid. "You gonna let her keep playing Monopoly in your real house?" Maggie didn't reply. She didn't need to. She turned and headed back toward her bedroom, where her puzzle waited, unfinished but precise. On the way, she passed the thermostat, a sleek, smart model Amanda had installed and synced to her phone. Maggie pressed a button, just once. The temperature dropped by 4 degrees. Downstairs, the laughter stopped mid-sentence. By Monday, Maggie was back in Clarence's office. "We're starting to build the number," she said, placing a manila folder on his desk. Inside, every gas, electric, and water bill from the last 8 years. All in her name. Clarence adjusted his glasses. "You're not subtle." "I'm 73, she said. "I've earned the right to stop pretending." He scanned the documents. "You realize they've been living here rent-free for almost a decade?" "Not rent-free," she said. "Just unpaid." Clarence pulled a legal pad from his drawer. "You want to calculate this based on market value? Start there. Add utilities, shared square footage. Then let's factor in damages. Psychological, aesthetic, structural." He chuckled. "You're serious." "I'm methodical." That evening, Maggie sat with a calculator, a spreadsheet, and a notebook she hadn't touched since her husband died. On the front, Household Ledger, 2006 onward. By the end of the night, she had totals for electricity, water, waste, cable, and internet usage, all divided proportionally. The back rent valuation, conservatively estimated, staggered even her. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt organized. She filed it all in a folder labeled Occupancy Valuation, Waller Estate. The next morning, while Amanda was at brunch and Trevor at work, Maggie printed 3 copies. She left one on her nightstand. One went into her fireproof lockbox, and the third, that she slipped into an envelope and addressed to Clarence with one note clipped to the top. "Add this to the repayment package, quietly, for now." Just as she sealed the envelope, her phone buzzed again. Another email. This one with an attachment, a new HOA application submitted by Amanda, requesting exterior renovations. The project name? Phase 1. Mother-in-law wing removal. The photo looked sweet, cropped perfectly, filtered warm. Amanda in a soft focus kitchen, Trevor behind her, holding a casserole. Haley near the edge of the frame, half smiling, and Maggie, in the background, out of focus, seated in a cardigan, looking down at a crossword puzzle. A snapshot of age, fragility, and quiet resignation. The caption read, "Caring for our live-in elder has been a journey, emotionally and financially. Any support means the world. Family first. Caregiving life." Below, a GoFundMe link, bold and bright. Maggie stared at her phone, breath caught between disbelief and fury so sharp it made her fingers tingle. She hadn't spoken a word to Amanda all week, and now here she was, packaged, pitied, and pixelated for donations. She tapped screenshot, then another of the caption, then a third of the campaign's $340 raised so far. The photos went into a folder, digital fraud, Waller claim. By noon, she was back in Clarence's office. She said nothing as she slid the phone across the desk. Clarence raised one brow as he scrolled. Well, well. Exploitation dressed in empathy. "I'm a tax-paying homeowner," Maggie said. "Not a charity case." He tapped the side of his monitor. "Can we build a fraud clause into the repayment motion?" she asked, jaw tight. "Already did," Clarence said. "Elder exploitation. If they try to countersue, this makes their credibility bleed out on the sidewalk." Maggie let out a low breath. It wasn't relief. It was just the clearing of space for something sharper to move in. That evening, Haley knocked softly on Maggie's door, then slipped in and closed it behind her. She looked pale, shaken. "I didn't know they posted that," she said. "People at school are saying we're broke, that you're dying." Maggie looked up from her ledger and met her granddaughter's eyes. "I'm neither," she said. "But I am done being quiet." Haley sat beside her. "I hate how she uses you," she whispered. "Like you're a prop." Maggie reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small prepaid phone, unopened, still sealed in shrink wrap. She handed it over gently. "This is just for us. You and me. If things ever go sideways, you use this. Don't text me. Just call. I'll come get you, no questions." Haley nodded slowly. Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She just slid the phone into her jacket pocket and hugged Maggie tighter than she had in months. By Saturday, the house was once again a stage. Amanda had invited a new group over for brunch, a rotating cast of perfectly blow-dried women and bored husbands. Trevor played host this time, pouring mimosas and telling half-true stories about how hard caregiving was when you have a full-time tech job and a mother-in-law underfoot. From her seat in the sunroom, Maggie listened to every word. She knew the script now. Amanda would pivot soon, first into plans, then into declarations, and right on cue. "We're thinking of redoing the kitchen," Amanda said to the group, swirling her glass. "Might even knock out the wall on Mom's side. Open it all up. Clean lines, better flow." Maggie froze, not because of the words, but because of the smile Amanda wore when she said them. Like a realtor who'd already signed the papers, Pearl, who'd shown up uninvited and unbothered, leaned in from across the room. "She means your side, doesn't she?" Maggie didn't reply. She simply stood up and walked into the hall, her steps slow, deliberate. She reached into the drawer where the HOA documents were now kept under lock. She pulled out the renovation request Amanda had submitted behind her back. She placed it on the kitchen island in full view of the brunch crowd. And then, slowly, in front of them all, she picked up a pen and wrote in thick, permanent ink across the top, "Denied. Owner override." Amanda's laugh cut off mid-breath. The room went silent. Maggie looked up, calm, precise. "Funny," she said coolly. "How many decisions get made around here without consulting the woman who owns the roof you're standing under?" Amanda's tote bag was ridiculous. Monogrammed Louis Vuitton, oversized and impractical, always overstuffed with receipts she never filed and beauty samples she never used. Maggie had watched that bag slouch across every surface in the house, the dining table, the piano bench, even the top of Maggie's cedar hope chest once, like a flag planted on stolen land. This morning Maggie slipped something inside it, not a letter, not a note, an invoice, thick stock paper, laser printed, stapled in the corner, to Amanda Waller, from Margaret Ellen Waller, subject, past due charges, occupancy, utilities, fraudulent claims, and disrespect. Total, $61,400. She placed it between Amanda's skincare pouch and her phone charger, right where Amanda would find it digging for her keys. Then she went to the porch, poured herself a cup of early gray, and waited. The scream came 32 minutes later. Amanda stood in the foyer, waving the invoice like it was a summons from hell. "What is this supposed to be?" Trevor came down the stairs, still in athletic shorts, blinking like the light offended him. "What's going on?" "Your mother thinks we owe her $61,000, Amanda snapped, shoving the papers in his hands. "For breathing, apparently." Trevor chuckled like this was a sitcom. "Are you serious?" he called over Amanda's shoulder. "This is real." Maggie stood. Her cup was already empty. "I'm very serious," she said, "and legally prepared." She stepped forward, voice level, spine steel. "That document itemizes occupancy value, utility costs, false representation, and moral depreciation, dated, signed, and reviewed by my attorney." Trevor's mouth hung open like he expected a punchline. Amanda, red-faced and vibrating, hissed through her teeth. "You think you can just bill us for living here?" "No," Maggie said. "I know I can." By the end of the day, Clarence had filed a formal repayment request, or, alternatively, a court-enforceable eviction notice. The envelope was hand-delivered via certified courier. Amanda refused to sign for it. Trevor tried to intercept, but the courier snapped a photo of the handoff on the welcome mat. Maggie printed it and added it to the ledger. That night, Amanda went quiet. But her thumbs didn't. Her social media lit up in passive-aggressive flickers. Greed looks a lot like dementia in pearls. Some people forget who took care of them. Good thing I remember. It's your family first. Elder abuse goes both ways, you know. Maggie didn't reply. Not right away, but 2 days later, she posted a single photo to her own long-dormant Facebook account, a scanned image of her original house deed. Her name, her signature, dated and recorded, captioned simply, "Clarity." Within an hour, Amanda's vague posts dried up, but the real retaliation came next, coiled and calculated. Late one afternoon, Maggie returned from the post office to find Haley sitting on the porch steps, eyes wide with worry. "They're talking to someone on Zoom," Haley whispered. "A lawyer. I heard your name. Something about guardianship." Maggie's breath stayed steady, but something cold unspooled in her chest. Inside, Amanda's voice echoed through the hallway. "If we get a medical review started now, the court can appoint us conservators before she does. Anything drastic?" Trevor added, "It's not about money. It's about making sure she's still, competent." Haley looked up at her, jaw clenched. "They're trying to flip it, Grandma." Maggie nodded once, not panicked, just ready. She pulled out her phone, tapped a shortcut, and opened a voice recording app. Then, she quietly hit record and slipped it back into her pocket. Upstairs, Amanda continued rambling. "She's forgetful, detached, just not present the way she used to be." Maggie listened, one eyebrow arched. Tomorrow she had an appointment with her doctor, not for pain, not for a checkup, but for a full cognitive assessment, notarized and signed. She had already booked it, already anticipated this. Downstairs she whispered to Haley, steady and low, "Let them talk." The clinic was tucked into a quiet side street off West Broad, where the maple trees had begun to yellow and the parking lot lines were faded but straight. Maggie arrived 15 minutes early, alone, in a pressed blouse and dark slacks that fit with quiet authority. She wore no makeup. She didn't need war paint, only clarity. The receptionist barely looked up. "Cognitive evaluation?" Maggie nodded. "Margaret Waller, 11 o'clock. She was ushered into a clean, windowed room with a single desk, 2 chairs, and a small stack of printed forms. Across from her sat Dr. Lena Ruiz, a board-certified geriatrician with calm eyes and a sharp pen. They began with memory exercises. Maggie rattled off word sequences backward without blinking, recalled dates, locations, the current president, the past 3, and what day of the week Pearl's second husband died. "You're sure about that one?" Dr. Ruiz asked, half smiling. "I gave the eulogy," Maggie replied. Then came logic patterns, basic arithmetic, drawing a clock face from memory. Maggie didn't just draw it. She shaded the hands with elegant precision, labeling the minute marks like a retired school secretary would. "By the end, Doctor." Ruiz looked almost disappointed. "You could teach half my interns a thing or two." "I used to teach all of them," Maggie said, standing. 30 minutes later, she walked out with a notarized letter in her purse. Cognitive evaluation result. No impairment, no concern. Sound judgment. Stamped, sealed, signed. She called Clarence from the parking lot. "It's done. Add it to the package." "I'll have it bound and indexed," he said. "If they come at you with a knife, you'll already have the autopsy written." That afternoon, Amanda and Trevor were in the middle of a thinly veiled performance about concerns for Maggie's stability. Amanda doing her usual crocodile empathy, Trevor faking nervous energy for Haley's benefit. Maggie didn't interrupt. She hit record again. She waited until Amanda, mid-rant, threw her arms in the air and snapped, "She's old, not stupid." Maggie tapped Save, then tapped Upload to her secure cloud folder. Pearl came over that evening with chicken salad and a chilled bottle of boxed Chardonnay, wearing her I Smell Bullshit cardigan. Maggie handed her the cognitive evaluation. Pearl scanned the letter, let out a low whistle, and leaned back in her chair. "That," she said, tapping the page, "should be your will header. Just this. No intro, no warm-up. Boom." Maggie allowed herself the smallest smile. "I'm not dying, Pearl." Pearl poured them each a glass. "No, but you're definitely burying somebody." Later that night, Maggie filed the letter in her locked cabinet under defense. Preemptive. She opened the envelope Clarence had sent, now thick with documents, ownership proof, expense breakdowns, formal communications, the fraud clause, and now her clean bill of cognitive health. It wasn't a defense package anymore. It was a weapon kit. She locked the cabinet, then opened her bedroom window, just enough to hear Amanda's voice floating up from the patio below. "I just don't know how much longer I can deal with this. We've tried everything. I'm bending over backwards." Maggie leaned into the windowsill, eyes sharp under the soft hum of the ceiling fan. The house smelled like betrayal, but the air was finally hers again. Then her phone buzzed, a new email from Clarence. Subject, item filed, Amanda Waller, social fundraiser audit, flagged body, IRS has acknowledged receipt. This may open a separate investigation. We'll be ready. By the second week of October, Amanda had begun giving house tours like she was prepping it for a spread in Better Homes and Blackmail. "This is the original molding," she said to a real estate friend in tight jeans and tall boots, gesturing to the trim Maggie's late husband had painted himself in '94. "We're thinking of opening up this whole wall eventually. Just gotta nudge Mom toward assisted living when she's ready." Maggie, seated 3 feet away in the sunroom with a Sudoku book and zero intention of leaving, didn't even blink. She'd already replaced the hallway light bulbs, motion-activated 1080p security cameras tucked inside each one, discreet, legal, clearly posted per Ohio code, with a neat laminated sign near the entry. "Recording in progress for property protection. Owner consent filed." Amanda had sneered at the sign like it was a weed in her aesthetic. "Seriously?" "I take my legal standing seriously," Maggie had replied. "You should try it sometime." Later that week, a cream envelope from the HOA arrived. Maggie opened it over her tea, eyebrows lifting as she read, "Dear Mrs. Waller, per your daughter-in-law Amanda's recent inquiry about holiday exterior lighting extensions, we'd like to confirm proper ownership documentation on file. Our records list her as primary contact for this address. Please advise. Sincerely, Heritage Glen, HOA." Maggie exhaled. Slowly. A laugh, almost. By noon, she had faxed the title deed, mortgage registration, and trust documents to the HOA office, with a note clipped to the front. "To clarify, Amanda Waller has no legal ownership or agency over this property. Please update your records accordingly. Margaret Ellen Waller, sole title holder." She followed up with a phone call. She made sure they understood the difference between a daughter-in-law and a deed holder. She hung up with the kind of poise that doesn't need to raise its voice to sharpen its teeth. By that evening, Clarence had updated her will. Amanda was removed entirely. No clauses, no contingencies, no soft landings. "In the event of my death," the new draft read, "Amanda Waller shall receive no property, payment, inheritance, or access. This exclusion is intentional, irrevocable, and fully informed." Maggie initialed every page. Clarence added it to the binder beneath a new tab. "Beneficiary revision. Permanent." That Saturday, Haley came into Maggie's room with a paint tray in one hand and a half-used gallon of blue sage in the other. "Figured it's time this room felt like yours again," she said. "Like really yours." Maggie blinked, momentarily stunned. The walls had been Amanda's choice for years. Soft beige with pearl undertones, impersonal, real estate safe. Now, with each brushstroke, the sage took over. Cool, clean, certain. "Your side of the house now," Haley said, dipping the roller again. "Everyone should have one." They worked in silence, soft music playing from Haley's phone. Between coats, Maggie pulled down the old framed photo Amanda had hung above the dresser, some anonymous pastel landscape, and replaced it with a black and white photo of her and her husband in 1972, standing in front of the house when they first bought it. She dusted the frame with her sleeve. "This was the day we closed," she said softly. "Before he got sick. Before it got noisy." Haley looked over and smiled. "Looks peaceful." Maggie nodded. It was. The next morning, as Maggie poured coffee in her robe, Amanda breezed in with her phone against her cheek. "Yes, the guest room is updated. The master bath is technically shared but mostly ours. And the front porch? Stunning. Great for morning lattes." Maggie looked up. "Who are you talking to?" Amanda turned, still smiling for the call. "Oh, just a friend from work. She might be looking for a place. We've got the space." Maggie set her coffee down, calm, precise. "You don't have space," she said. "You have notice." Amanda blinked. "What?" Maggie gestured toward the hallway. Amanda followed her gaze and saw a new envelope pinned to the message board. A second certified document from Clarence, stamped that morning. Amanda yanked it down and opened it with trembling fingers. "Intent to vacate notice, non-owner occupants. Deadline, 30 days. Failure to comply will result in formal eviction filing." Amanda's voice cracked. "You're serious?" Maggie took a sip of her coffee. "I don't bluff, dear. That's your department." The realtor arrived on a Thursday. Her name was Justine. She wore low heels and a blazer the color of early fall apples. Professional, warm, disarmingly efficient. Amanda opened the door with a smile so brittle it could have sliced bone. "There must be a mistake," she said. "I didn't schedule a walkthrough." Justine tilted her head, already glancing down at the clipboard in her hand. "Oh, I'm not here on your behalf. I represent Mrs. Margaret Waller. She's requested a market-ready walkthrough. We're going live next week." Amanda's smile didn't break. It calcified. "We're not selling the house." Maggie's voice floated in from the hallway. "No, Amanda, you're not." Amanda turned. Maggie stood there in soft blue slacks, cardigan buttoned high, her hair pinned neatly in a style she'd worn to school board meetings for 2 decades. "I am," she said. Trevor stormed in from the den, phone still in hand. "You can't just sell the family home." Maggie looked at him flatly. "You're not family in the deed, Trevor. You're a guest who overstayed." He opened his mouth, but Justine stepped forward. "Let's begin in the kitchen, shall we?" By 10:30 the next morning, the first open house sign had gone up in the yard. Amanda tried to yank it out of the ground herself, twice, but Justine had hammered it deep. Haley watched from the porch, one foot tucked under her on the swing, silent. "Why are all these people coming?" Amanda asked, pacing the hallway like it owed her answers. "To see the home," Maggie said, breezing by with a tray of fresh lemon water and perfectly stacked flyers. "Would you mind moving your handbag off the dining table? It's scaring the light." Guests arrived in waves, retired couples, young families, 2 remote-working sisters from Dayton who loved the crown molding and character bones. Amanda followed them like a ghost tour guide, interjecting with commentary. "It's my mother-in-law's space, but we're kind of all merged. And if you ignore the antique furniture, you can totally imagine modern renovations." Maggie didn't say a word. She let Pearl do the talking. Pearl, in a teal turtleneck and orthopedic flats, greeted every potential buyer with a warm smile and a box of fresh cookies she'd baked the night before. She handed each guest a flyer, front and back, designed by Haley herself. The header read, "For sale by trust. Owner occupied, no lines, clear title, estate holder on site." Amanda trailed behind Pearl like a cat in a bath. Trevor texted Maggie 19 times before noon. "What are you doing? You're blowing this out of proportion. We can talk about this." "Mom?" Maggie never replied. Instead, she slipped her phone into a locked drawer and walked the hall with Justine, who updated her quietly about each offer. Interest was strong. The price would rise. Clarence called just before the last tour ended. "Preliminary vetting done. 3 buyers have clean financials. I'll screen the rest personally." Choose whoever wants it most, Maggie said. I'm not selling a house, I'm selling my silence. As the sun began to slip behind the trees, Amanda stood in the foyer, arms folded, jaw clenched. You're really doing this, she said, eyes glassy. Maggie stepped into the living room and glanced around. She could still smell the sugar from Pearl's cookies, still hear the murmurs of strangers who'd admired the crown molding and hardwood floors. The house didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like evidence. Pack what's yours, Maggie said quietly. If you can find anything that is. Before Amanda could speak, Justine poked her head in with a bright smile. We just got an offer. Full cash. No contingencies. Amanda's hand trembled. Maggie didn't flinch. The morning the offer was accepted, the air in the house felt impossibly still, like it was holding its breath. Maggie sat in her study, sunlight pooling across the hardwood floor, as Justine's email lit up her inbox with a quiet finality that needed no exclamation mark. Offer accepted. Full cash, no contingencies. Buyer wants a 45-day close. Contract attached for your review. Maggie didn't reply immediately. She simply leaned back in her chair, fingertips resting on the edge of her mug, and looked around the room that had once been her husband's office. The walls were still lined with the same worn bookshelves, the same copper desk lamp with the dented base, the same framed license plate he'd found during their road trip to Vermont in '88. There were ghosts here, but none of them screamed. They didn't need to. The living did enough of that. When Amanda saw the sale pending rider mounted beneath the for sale sign that afternoon, she all but clawed it off the post. She can't do this, she muttered, pacing in the driveway with her phone pressed to one ear and her laptop balanced on the hood of her car. She's not of sound. There has to be a way to flag it. Records, prescriptions, something. Trevor sat slouched on the porch swing, staring at his phone like it held a different future. She's not stupid, Amanda. If she were, this would have all happened a long time ago. Amanda ignored him. She had already sent emails to 2 online legal forums, one anonymous whistleblower tip site, and a cognitive health blog for adult children dealing with parental decline. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Maggie's medical documentation was already sealed behind Clarence's firewall, triple notarized, time-stamped, and immune to amateur sleuthing. Meanwhile, Maggie continued preparing for transition. She updated her mailing address with her bank, rerouted her prescriptions to a nearby pharmacy, and removed her wedding band from the little porcelain dish near the sink, tucking it into her safe with a finality she didn't announce. Not even to Pearl. Later that evening, Trevor approached her in the hallway, his face taut with something halfway between apology and self-preservation. Just give us the basement, he said quietly, as if the lower level of the home he never owned was now a last refuge. That's all. We'll stay out of the way. Pay our share. No more drama. Maggie continued folding the linen towel in her arms, pressing the creases into place with precision. She didn't look up when she answered. I gave you the entire upstairs, Trevor, for 8 years. No rent, no contract, and no gratitude. I didn't ask to move back here, he muttered, the fight already draining from him. No, she said. You just never asked to leave. Haley knocked on her bedroom door later that night, dragging a small suitcase behind her and carrying a stack of sweatshirts folded tight against her chest. She didn't say much, just set the suitcase near the bed and looked up. If it's okay, I'm going to start sleeping over here. Mom's been off. Maggie nodded and opened her armoire, clearing the middle shelf with care. She reached for a fresh pillowcase from the drawer, handed it over, then said softly, Wherever I go, Haley, there's a room for you. That won't change. Haley blinked fast but didn't cry. She just set her things down and started unpacking. The formal move-out notice arrived 2 days later via a bonded courier. Amanda accepted the envelope with trembling hands, her robe half open and mascara smeared from the night before. She read the cover page aloud, as if it might disappear by denial alone. Writ of possession, non-owner occupants. Final notice to vacate 14 days. Trevor came downstairs in socks and a wrinkled t-shirt just as she dropped onto the couch. She filed an eviction, Amanda whispered. She filed a goddamn eviction on her own family. Trevor sank into the opposite armchair. "We're not on the deed. We never were. It's not our house." Amanda looked around the room they had redecorated, remodeled, and misappropriated for almost a decade. For a moment, her mouth parted as if she might say something profound. But nothing came. The walls had gone back to silence. That evening, Clarence sent a brief email confirming that the buyers, a well-off couple from Cincinnati, had completed all financial vetting and intended to take possession the moment escrow closed. One was an attorney, the other, an IRS fraud analyst. Clarence's final line was short, but razor-sharp. "They're reviewing Amanda's GoFundMe campaign as part of due diligence. It may constitute fraud. Prepare accordingly." Maggie closed the email without reaction. Outside, the wind carried the first hint of winter across the porch. The leaves had started to fall. Inside, Amanda and Trevor sat in a home that no longer belonged to them, because in truth, it never had. The sale closed on a Friday. There was no champagne, no confetti, no staged key handoff with gold balloons. Just a digital confirmation from the title agency, a wire transfer notice, and the numbers displayed in black font on a white screen. Final sale price, $659,000. Appraised value, $578,900. Difference, $80,100 over asking. Maggie didn't react, not outwardly. She simply closed her laptop, removed the small framed photo of her and her husband from the shelf beside her desk, and slid it gently into the center of a labeled moving box. She took one last slow lap through the house, through the echo of a foyer that once held birthdays and slammed doors, past the hallway where Amanda had hung "Live Laugh Love" wall decals without asking, and into the sunroom where Maggie had sat quietly through 1,000 afternoons of manufactured chaos. She didn't say goodbye. She had already done that years ago. The condo was smaller, cleaner, and easier. A 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor with a view of Pearl's Church parking lot and a sweet-faced maintenance man who knocked before entering. The walls were painted dove gray, the kitchen was white quartz, and the guest bedroom had perfect morning light. Haley helped unpack the boxes, careful, intentional, quiet like her grandmother. They didn't speak much, but the silence was soft, not brittle. On the second night in the condo, Haley stood in the doorway of the freshly made guest room with a laundry basket tucked against her hip. "You sure I'm not intruding?" Maggie, fluffing the pillows on the twin bed, didn't turn to answer. "I'm sure you're already home." Haley smiled and dropped the basket beside the dresser. "Good, because Mom asked if I was staying with her this weekend, and I told her I had plans with someone responsible." The mailbox key still stuck a little, but Maggie worked it free on her second try. There was a bundle of forwarded mail, a few junk flyers, and one cream envelope with no return address. Inside, a note in Amanda's handwriting, sloppy, rushed, desperate. "We're struggling. Things are tight. Trevor's been out of work, and there are fees coming we didn't expect. Can we talk?" Maggie folded the letter once and set it beside her tea. She didn't respond that night. Instead, she went to her file cabinet, opened the drawer labeled Occupancy and Legal, and removed the original invoice, still stapled, still crisp. She uncapped a red marker, drew a thick diagonal line across the top, and wrote in bold block letters, "Paid by sale." The next morning, she slid invoice into a new envelope, addressed it to Amanda, and added a sticky note to the front. "Final copy for your records." No return address. No smiley face, no wink, just the cold weight of truth, formalized and delivered. That afternoon, Clarence stopped by with a leather portfolio under one arm and a travel mug that smelled like Earl Grey and litigation. He took a seat at Maggie's kitchen table, opened the folder, and began walking her through the final trust documents. "The estate is fully transitioned, deed recorded, trust finalized, funds secured. You're now holding both the title and the trust successor line with no contest on record." Maggie nodded, flipping through the notarized pages without urgency. "Good." Clarence paused. "You want me to notify them?" "No," she said, placing her palm gently on the closed folder. "Let the silence do the work." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. "Noted." As he rose to leave, Haley appeared in the doorway with a fresh towel over her shoulder and a wet hairbrush in hand. Clarence smiled at her. "You settling in all right?" Haley gave him a half smile. "Better than they are." That night, as the streetlights flickered on outside the window and the hum of a peaceful neighborhood carried through the screen, Maggie stood in the kitchen, making tea. She glanced at the empty space above the sink and made a quiet decision. Tomorrow, she would hang the framed deed there. The original, signed, stamped, unshakable. Right next to it, she'd hang the invoice. The ink dried on the second trust document one quiet Tuesday morning, right around the time the neighbor's dog barked at the recycling truck for the third week in a row. Maggie sat across from Clarence in the soft gray conference room of his office, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup and watching the pages slide from the printer tray like freshly minted resolve. Unlike the first trust, this one didn't just protect Maggie's home, it carried forward her legacy. Clarence cleared his throat gently. "We've listed Haley as sole beneficiary, with full rights to the trust assets upon your passing or incapacitation. You'll remain trustee for life. Amanda and Trevor are disqualified by name and condition. The exclusion clause is airtight, for cause and conduct." Maggie nodded, her fingers resting over the folder like a paperweight that could never be lifted. "Can they contest it?" she asked, not out of worry but completion. "They can try," Clarence said. "But the judge won't blink. We've got years of documentation, medical proof, fraud reports, the eviction, and now the sale. There's not a hole in sight." She allowed herself a slow breath, not quite a sigh, more like the deliberate release of something she'd carried under her ribs for too long. Her hands were steady as she signed each page, clause by clause, signature by signature, every stroke of the pen a final nail in the door they once barged through without knocking. That evening, Maggie and Pearl sat on the balcony of the condo with mismatched mugs of boxed wine and a small plate of cheddar slices between them. The sky had gone that soft watercolor pink that always made Pearl nostalgic for things she never liked in the first place. "So," Pearl said, raising her glass, "retirement? Upgraded." Maggie clinked hers gently. "Fully loaded." They both laughed. Genuine, easy laughter that didn't sound like defense or sarcasm. Just two women who'd outlived 1,000 obligations and were finally sipping something that tasted like earned peace. In the mail that week came a small envelope, postmarked from Heritage Glen. Inside was a simple thank you note on embossed cardstock from the HOA president herself. It read, "Dear Mrs. Waller, thank you for helping restore clarity and proper ownership documentation within our community. Your cooperation and grace during the transition were noticed and appreciated. Sincerely, Janet Kramer." HOA President Maggie didn't keep many letters. But this one, she slid into a folder marked Community Affairs, closed with a faint smile. It wasn't just a thank you, it was a confession. Later that weekend, Haley hovered in the hallway outside Maggie's study with a laptop tucked beneath her arm and a look that was both sheepish and hopeful. "Do you have a second?" she asked. Maggie looked up from her filing cabinet and gestured to the chair across from her. "I've been thinking," Haley said, opening her laptop, "about applying to the College of Charleston. It's a long shot and I haven't figured out financial aid yet, but they have a sociology program that focuses on justice systems and—" "Apply," Maggie said simply. Haley blinked. "You haven't even seen it yet." "I don't need to," Maggie replied. "I've already opened a separate education account. It's under the trust, fully funded. If that's where you want to go, then that's where you'll go." Haley didn't speak at first. She just looked down, swiping slowly through the tuition estimates and program links. Her hand was trembling slightly, and Maggie reached over without a word, steadying the laptop and her granddaughter with one hand. "You were never a backup plan," Maggie said. "You've always been the next step." Later that night, Maggie opened her bedroom closet and carefully removed the new fireproof safe installed behind her coats. Inside were 3 documents: the original deed, the finalized trust for Haley, and the notarized letter that excluded Amanda and Trevor for eternity. She stared at them for a long time, not with vengeance, but with clarity. Then she closed the safe, spun the dial, and turned off the light. In the distance, her phone buzzed. A new text. From a number she didn't recognize, but whose cadence she did. "I know you hate me. But maybe one day you'll remember we were family. I just wanted to say goodbye." Maggie didn't respond. Instead, she turned to her calendar and circled next Thursday. That was the day Haley's first college application was due. The frame arrived wrapped in brown paper tied with twine and lined in velvet foam. Maggie unboxed it carefully at the kitchen table while Haley read the instructions aloud from her laptop like they were handling crown jewels. It wasn't expensive, just custom. Clean lines, black wood, museum glass, archival safe. Maggie didn't want glare or fingerprints, she wanted permanence. Inside, she mounted 2 pieces side by side. On the left, the birthday envelope Amanda had tossed at her 6 months ago, still creased at the corner, the words, "From the government," scrawled in Sharpie across the front. On the right, the invoice, final version, legally formatted, red-stamped paid by sale, centered just beneath her name. She titled the whole piece, "Before and After." Then she hung it in the entryway, where the morning sun lit the paper just enough to catch the sharpness in the ink. Pearl came by later that afternoon, her arms full of groceries and her curiosity unchecked. She stopped mid-stride when she saw it. "Oh, Maggie," she whispered, setting down the bag of celery and black licorice. "You didn't." "I did," Maggie said, tapping the glass with one fingernail. "History deserves a proper frame." Pearl stepped back, arms crossed, a slow smile spreading like something earned. "You turned pettiness into principle. Honestly, that's art." 2 days later, Amanda appeared at the condo's front door during a scheduled pickup. One Maggie had agreed to only because Haley needed a few documents for school still tied to her parents' insurance. It was meant to be quick, civil, quiet. Amanda barely looked up when Maggie opened the door. She held her phone in one hand, sunglasses in the other, and wore the same over-applied foundation she'd favored since 2013. But then she stepped inside. Her eyes caught the frame before her brain did. She froze, her mouth parting slightly, the usual volley of pre-scripted pleasantries vanishing before they could escape. She read the Sharpie on the envelope. She read the stamp on the invoice. She looked up at Maggie, blinking once. Maggie didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Amanda turned toward the hallway, murmured Haley's name like it was a spell to break tension, and quickly disappeared into the guest room. Haley emerged a moment later, backpack over one shoulder, expression unreadable. She passed Maggie with a nod and stopped just inside the front door, where Amanda had paused to gather herself. "Are you serious?" Amanda muttered, still staring at the frame. "You're actually proud of this?" Haley glanced at the glass, then back at her mother. Her voice was quiet, unshaken. "She's displaying the truth. You're allergic to it." Amanda blinked, as if the words had landed somewhere beneath her ribs. Maggie closed the door behind them without watching them leave. That weekend, she was invited back to her old elementary school for the annual alumni brunch, something she hadn't attended in years. But this time, the invitation had come with a handwritten note from the principal herself. "Your recent donation helped fund a full set of classroom tablets for Title I students. We'd love to honor you this year." Maggie arrived in a soft navy blazer, her hair pinned back in a style she hadn't worn since her final year before retirement. When she stepped into the multi-purpose room, a few faculty members stood and clapped. The sound startled her. She hadn't been applauded since the district consolidated payroll in 2009. One teacher whispered, "That's her. That's the Waller Fund." Maggie didn't speak during the presentation. She let the new principal list the donation figures, show photos of the students using the tablets, and read a thank you note written by a 4th grader who had never owned a computer before. Pearl was there too, tucked in the second row, dabbing the corner of her eyes with a tissue she pretended not to need. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed and Maggie stood near the coffee table accepting gentle handshakes and small hugs, the principal leaned in close and asked quietly, "May I ask what inspired the gift?" Maggie looked toward the mural on the back wall, the one she had helped paint when the school first opened, and then down at her shoes, just for a second. "Someone once gave me something," she said. "Something cheap and careless. I decided to give the opposite." As she exited the building, the autumn wind lifted the edge of her scarf, and for a moment, she thought of how different the air felt when you owned your peace, not just protected it. When she got home, she turned on the hallway light and stood once more before the framed display. This time, she didn't see spite or vengeance. She saw a full sentence, a punctuation mark that finally landed. The rain came soft that morning, a slow mist pressing against the condo windows like a memory that didn't know where else to go. Maggie sat at her dining table in a freshly laundered cardigan, the kind with pearl buttons and sleeves that still held the faint scent of lavender detergent. Beside her sat Clarence, as punctual as ever, flipping the last few pages of her estate binder with a fountain pen poised and ready. They had done this dance before. Trusts, deeds, filings. But today felt different. Not because it was more urgent, because it was final. "We're nearly done," Clarence said, voice quiet but sure. "Just one clause left to authorize. After this, there's nothing left to contest." Maggie reached for her glasses. The page he slid across to her was labeled Addendum D, Closure Clause subsection A. Any party who challenges this estate plan or attempts to dispute its structure, distribution, or authorship forfeits all rights to any inheritance, residual property, or legal standing therein. Subsection B. Said clause is non-negotiable, irrevocable, and enforceable upon filing. Maggie ran a finger down the margin, not skimming, but absorbing. Each line was a guardrail, each sentence a locked gate. Across the table, Haley sat silently, a pen in her hand, but not yet moving. Clarence had invited her to witness the signing, not because it was required, but because Maggie had asked her to be there. A legacy wasn't just something you left behind. Sometimes it needed to be handed over while you were still breathing. "Everything okay?" Maggie asked gently, watching Haley's eyes scan the page. Haley nodded. "Yeah, I didn't know you could do this, like, seal it off that completely." Clarence smiled faintly. "Most people don't. But then, most people aren't Margaret Waller." That made Haley smile too, and with that, she signed in the witness block. Maggie followed, slow and deliberate, her signature steady even as the rain traced lines down the glass. Clarence slid the page back into the binder, pressed the cover down, and locked it with a quiet click. A sound like a door being closed, without the slam. "I'll file this with the probate office by end of day," he said, standing. "After that, there's no coming back in, not for anyone." Maggie didn't look up. "That's the point." That afternoon, Amanda tried again. This time not with legal claims or false concern, but a last-ditch email that landed in Maggie's inbox with the subject line, "Just one honest conversation." Maggie never saw it. The server bounced it back instantly. Clarence had long since scrubbed and firewalled her contact permissions. Amanda's digital keys had all been revoked. Trevor, unaware of the failed email, ran into Maggie at Kroger 2 days later near the coffee aisle. He was wearing a rain jacket 2 sizes too large and pushing a cart with nothing but ramen and discounted salad dressing. Maggie was examining the beans. She saw him, registered him, and walked right past. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then thought better of it. In the parking lot, Maggie wiped down her windshield, watching the droplets scatter across the glass. The world outside felt distant now, like a town she'd once visited but no longer missed. Back at the condo, Pearl let herself in with her spare key, a tote bag full of pumpkin bread in one hand and a newspaper tucked under her arm. "You've officially made the back page of the Heritage Glen newsletter," she said, waving the paper like it was gossip gold. Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Under obituaries or classifieds?" Pearl chuckled. "Neither. Community highlights. Local resident assists HOA in successful property transition and tax review. Janet Kramer practically canonized you." Maggie poured them each a cup of tea and set down 2 buttered slices of bread. "You closed it all," Pearl said, tapping her mug, "without raising your voice." Maggie nodded slowly. "I spent years trying to be heard. Turns out, silence does more damage." They toasted. And later that night, when the condo had gone quiet and the tea had cooled in the sink, Maggie returned to her bedroom, opened the safe, and slipped the signed closure clause beside the other documents: deed, trust, legacy. Then she shut it tight, spun the dial, and turned out the light. And just before slipping into bed, she whispered not a prayer, but a sentence she hadn't said aloud in years. Done means done. The envelope was thick, linen stock, heavyweight, the kind that didn't bend. Something, she said, something cheap and careless. I decided to give the opposite. As she exited the building, the autumn wind lifted the edge of her scarf, and for a moment, she thought of how different the air felt when you owned your peace, not just protected it. When she got home, she turned on the hallway light and stood once more before the framed display. This time, she didn't see spite or vengeance. She saw a full sentence, a punctuation mark that finally landed. The rain came soft that morning, a slow mist pressing against the condo windows like a memory that didn't know where else to go. Maggie sat at her dining table in a freshly laundered cardigan, the kind with pearl buttons and sleeves that still held the faint scent of lavender detergent. Beside her sat Clarence, as punctual as ever, flipping the last few pages of her estate binder with a fountain pen poised and ready. They had done this dance before. Trusts, deeds, filings, but today felt different. Not because it was more urgent, because it was final. "We're nearly done," Clarence said, voice quiet but sure. "Just one clause left to authorize. After this, there's nothing left to contest." Maggie reached for her glasses. The page he slid across to her was labeled Addendum D, Closure Clause subsection A. Any party who challenges this estate plan or attempts to dispute its structure, distribution, or authorship forfeits all rights to any inheritance, residual property, or legal standing therein. Subsection B. Said clause is non-negotiable, irrevocable, and enforceable upon filing. Maggie ran a finger down the margin, not skimming, but absorbing. Each line was a guardrail, each sentence a locked gate. Across the table, Haley sat silently, a pen in her hand, but not yet moving. Clarence had invited her to witness the signing, not because it was required, but because Maggie had asked her to be there. A legacy wasn't just something you left behind. Sometimes it needed to be handed over while you were still breathing. "Everything okay?" Maggie asked gently, watching Haley's eyes scan the page. Haley nodded. "Yeah, I didn't know you could do this, seal it off that completely." Clarence smiled faintly. "Most people don't. But then, most people aren't Margaret Waller." That made Haley smile too, and with that, she signed in the witness block. Maggie followed, slow and deliberate, her signature steady even as the rain traced lines down the glass. Clarence slid the page back into the binder, pressed the cover down, and locked it with a quiet click. A sound like a door being closed, without the slam. "I'll file this with the probate office by end of day," he said, standing. "After that, there's no coming back in, not for anyone." Maggie didn't look up. "That's the point." That afternoon, Amanda tried again. This time not with legal claims or false concern, but a last-ditch email that landed in Maggie's inbox with the subject line, "Just one honest conversation." Maggie never saw it. The server bounced it back instantly. Clarence had long since scrubbed and firewalled her contact permissions. Amanda's digital keys had all been revoked. Trevor, unaware of the failed email, ran into Maggie at Kroger 2 days later near the coffee aisle. He was wearing a rain jacket 2 sizes too large and pushing a cart with nothing but ramen and discounted salad dressing. Maggie was examining the beans. She saw him, registered him, and walked right past. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then thought better of it. In the parking lot, Maggie wiped down her windshield, watching the droplets scatter across the glass. The world outside felt distant now, like a town she'd once visited but no longer missed. Back at the condo, Pearl let herself in with her spare key, a tote bag full of pumpkin bread in one hand and a newspaper tucked under her arm. "You've officially made the back page of the Heritage Glen newsletter," she said, waving the paper like it was gossip gold. Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Under obituaries or classifieds?" Pearl chuckled. "Neither. Community highlights. Local resident assists HOA in successful property transition and tax review. Janet Kramer practically canonized you." Maggie poured them each a cup of tea and set down 2 buttered slices of bread. "You closed it all," Pearl said, tapping her mug, without raising your voice. Maggie nodded slowly. I spent years trying to be heard. Turns out, silence does more damage. They toasted. And later that night, when the condo had gone quiet and the tea had cooled in the sink, Maggie returned to her bedroom, opened the safe, and slipped the signed closure clause beside the other documents: deed, trust, legacy. Then she shut it tight, spun the dial, and turned out the light. And just before slipping into bed, she whispered not a prayer, but a sentence she hadn't said aloud in years. Done means done. The envelope was thick, linen stock, heavyweight, the kind that didn't bend. Foyer. Just vibes. Maggie smiled, ushered them both in, and set the brunch on the table herself. No caterer, no trays, no performative plating. Scrambled eggs, biscuits, hash browns the way her husband used to make them, over-crisped at the edges and drenched in pepper, orange juice from concentrate, coffee strong enough to resuscitate. The morning moved with no urgency, like it had nowhere else to be. Conversation was light, laughter was low and frequent, and nothing about it required ceremony. When the time came for gifts, Maggie opened Pearl's first, a pair of novelty socks that read, "I have a trust and zero trust in people," across the ankles. Maggie cackled, then slipped them on immediately. Haley handed her the small box next. Inside, a simple gold necklace, a single charm at the center, an engraved key. I figured it's symbolic, Haley said softly. For, owning things. Maggie touched the charm with one finger. It's beautiful, she said, but unnecessary. That's what makes it a real gift, Haley replied, shrugging. The card came last. It was painted in watercolor and markers, an awkward but sincere mix of a sunrise and the word home done in oversized bubble letters. Inside, in careful cursive, Haley had written only one sentence. You made the ground beneath you yours again. Maggie didn't cry. She hadn't in months. But her throat went tight in the most affirming way. After the meal, the three of them moved to the living room. Maggie poured decaf while Pearl turned on the record player, Etta James, softly humming through the condo like a memory that never lost its edge. Haley, curled up on the edge of the couch, leaned her head against the armrest. What was your favorite gift this year? She asked, almost lazily. Maggie didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the wall opposite the fireplace. There, hanging side by side in matching frames, were the two documents that started and ended the storm. The envelope Amanda had once tossed across the birthday table, creased, sarcastic, pitiful, and the final invoice, red-stamped and definitive. Above them hung a single title card in embossed lettering, Before and After. Maggie took a sip of her coffee, then set it down carefully. Silence, she said, and an empty driveway. Pearl laughed so hard she had to fan herself. You savage. Maggie just smiled. Long time coming. A few hours later, after the dishes were done and the apartment had returned to stillness, Maggie stood alone in the living room, gazing once more at the frames. From the government, she muttered under her breath. My foot. Her reflection winked faintly in the museum glass. She turned, walked into her office, and reached for a file labeled Legacy. Confirmed. Inside it, tucked between notarized copies and Clarence's final summary, was a printout of Amanda's GoFundMe page, now flagged, inactive, and frozen by compliance review. At the top of the page was a donation entry from Maggie's checking account, dated 6 months prior. Amount, 1 cent message, final contribution, debt closed. Maggie didn't need to frame that one. She knew its weight. As she returned to the kitchen to refill her glass and begin writing her thank you notes, she paused, pulled open the drawer next to the fridge, and slipped Amanda's envelope and the original invoice back into their place, just in case the next generation ever needed a reminder. She smoothed her hand across the countertop, watching the shadows shift across the marble. The day was ending the way she'd chosen it. Quietly, with ownership in every sense of the word. And with a smirk that didn't quite reach her lips, she whispered under her breath, I delivered her mortgage, right after she delivered my favorite kind of gift, proof she never deserved a thing.